At the time, it didn't look like the beginning of anything serious, a manufacturing delay, a logistics hiccup, the kind of disruption that happens in global supply chains every few months. But what unfolded in the months that followed wasn't a disruption, it was a revelation. The world had built its entire digital infrastructure on a single point of failure, and that point had a name: Taiwan. By late 2024, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company (TSMC) was producing more than 90% of the world's most advanced chips, the ones that powered smartphones, data centers, military drones, AI systems, electric vehicles. Everything that mattered in the 21st century ran on silicon designed in California, manufactured in Hsinchu, and shipped to every corner of the globe. But the chips were only part of the equation. What made Taiwan irreplaceable wasn't just the factories. It was the knowledge, the decades of expertise compressed into nanometer-scale precision, the machines that cost hundreds of millions of dollars each, built by a Dutch company and controlled by international agreements, the workforce trained in processes so complex that replicating them elsewhere would take years, maybe a decade, and all of it sat 110 miles from mainland China. Nobody called it a crisis. In January 2025, a senior U.S. defense official was asked during a closed-door briefing what would happen if Taiwan's chip production went offline. The official paused, then said, "We'd be back to the 1990s, technologically, militarily, economically." The comment never made it into the press, but it circulated in classified memos across Washington, Brussels, Tokyo, and Beijing. At the time, none of this was visible to the public, but inside government briefings the tone had already changed, because everyone understood the implication. Taiwan wasn't just an island. It was the most strategically valuable piece of real estate on Earth. China knew it. The United States knew it. And both had spent years preparing for a scenario neither wanted to publicly acknowledge, that the question wasn't if Taiwan's semiconductor dominance would become a flashpoint, but when. The dependency didn't happen overnight. It was the result of decades of economic optimization. In the 1980s and 1990s, Western companies outsourced manufacturing to Asia to cut costs. Taiwan, with its educated workforce and government investment in technology, became the natural hub. TSMC, founded in 1987, pioneered the pure-play foundry model, building chips for other companies without designing its own. The model worked. By 2020, TSMC's market capitalization exceeded $500 billion. Its clients included Apple, Nvidia, AMD, Qualcomm, and the Pentagon, but the concentration of power created vulnerabilities. If TSMC's production halted, whether from a natural disaster, a cyber attack, or a military blockade, the global economy wouldn't slow down, it would fracture. Automakers would run out of chips within weeks. Smartphone production would stop, AI development would stall, military systems dependent on advanced processors would face critical shortages. And every government with skin in the game understood that the party controlling Taiwan's fabs controlled leverage unlike anything seen since the oil shocks of the 19th. Tensions around Taiwan had simmered for decades, but 2023 marked a shift. In April, China conducted its largest ever military exercises around the island, simulating a blockade. Warships encircled Taiwan. Fighter jets crossed the median line of the Taiwan Strait daily. Beijing called it routine training. Taiwan's government called it intimidation. Washington responded by increasing arms sales and deploying additional naval assets to the region. Japan and South Korea quietly began their own defense preparations. The rhetoric stayed measured, but the actions told a different story. Then in August 2024, something unexpected happened. TSMC announced it would delay the opening of its new fabrication plant in Arizona, a $40 billion project aimed at reducing U.S. dependence on Taiwanese production. The reason given was workforce challenges and regulatory delays, but industry insiders pointed to something else: quiet pressure from Taipei. Taiwan's government had no interest in weakening its greatest strategic asset. As long as the world needed Taiwan's chips, Taiwan had protection. Moving production to the US diluted that protection. The delay was a signal, subtle but clear. Taiwan wasn't just a tech hub, it was playing a geopolitical game of its own. Beijing had always viewed Taiwan as a renegade province. But the semiconductor issue added a new dimension. For decades, China had poured billions into developing its own chip industry, attempting to reduce reliance on foreign technology. The results were mixed. Chinese firms could produce older generation chips, but the cutting-edge nodes 5 nanometers, 3 nanometers remained out of reach. Western export controls ensured that outcome. The most critical tool, extreme ultraviolet lithography machines made by Netherlands-based ASML, was effectively banned from sale to Chinese companies. The restrictions were implemented under pressure from Washington, but they were enforced multilaterally. From Beijing's perspective, the situation looked very different. This wasn't just about market competition, it was containment. A technological blockade designed to prevent China from achieving self-sufficiency in the one industry that would define the next century. China's options were narrowing. It could continue trying to build domestic capacity, a process that might take another decade. Or it could pursue the faster, riskier path, reunification with Taiwan by force if necessary to seize control of the fabs, but that option came with catastrophic risks. A military invasion would likely destroy the very infrastructure China wanted to control. TSMC's fabs were delicate. The machines required constant calibration, specialized materials, and uninterrupted power. A single missile strike, a cyber attack, or even an evacuation of the workforce could render them useless, and even if the fabs survived, the global response would be immediate. Sanctions, embargoes, financial isolation. China's leadership understood this, but they also understood that time wasn't on their side. Washington faced its own impossible calculus. The United States had spent decades promoting globalization and free markets, but globalization had created a dependency that now threatened national security. In 2022, the CHIPS and Science Act allocated $52 billion to revitalize domestic semiconductor manufacturing. Intel, Samsung, and TSMC all announced plans to build fabs on U.S. soil, but the timeline was brutal. Even with government subsidies, constructing a state-of-the-art fab took 4 to 5 years. Training a skilled workforce took longer. And even then, U.S. production would only account for a fraction of global demand. In the meantime, the U.S. military relied on chips made in Taiwan. F-35 fighters, Aegis missile systems, satellite networks, all dependent on processors that could be cut off in a matter of hours if the Taiwan Strait became a war zone. The Pentagon ran simulations. The results were classified, but the conclusion leaked. In a conflict over Taiwan, the United States would face a choice between defending a treaty partner and risking the technological backbone of its own defense systems. There were no good options. In November 2024, a mid-level analyst at a Washington think tank published a paper titled "The Silicon Choke Point: Taiwan and the Next Global Crisis." The paper argued that the Taiwan semiconductor issue wasn't a hypothetical future problem. It was an active crisis masked by the appearance of normalcy. The logic was simple. If Taiwan's production was truly critical, then any threat to that production, whether from natural disaster, accident, or conflict, was a threat to the entire global system, and yet almost no contingency planning was happening. Governments stockpiled oil, they built strategic grain reserves, they had pandemic response plans, however flawed, but semiconductors, nothing. The paper circulated quietly. A few policymakers read it, fewer acted on it. 3 months later, the earthquake hit. At 6:47 a.m. local time on February 10, 2025, a 6.8 magnitude earthquake struck off the coast of Hualien, Taiwan. The tremor lasted 40 seconds. Buildings swayed in Taipei. Power flickered across the northern part of the island. TSMC's fabs, designed to withstand seismic events, automatically shut down production. Clean rooms were sealed. Machines were placed in safe mode. Within hours, TSMC issued a statement: all personnel safe, facilities undergoing assessment, production resumption timeline to be announced. The global reaction was immediate. Stock markets dropped. Tech companies' shares plummeted. Analysts scrambled to calculate the cost of even a week-long delay. Apple had new iPhones scheduled for production. Nvidia was ramping up AI chip orders. Automakers were already struggling with inventory. The earthquake wasn't catastrophic, but it revealed just how fragile the system was, and it raised a question nobody wanted to ask out loud. What if it hadn't been an earthquake? TSMC resumed partial production within 72 hours. Full operations returned in 2 weeks. The crisis, if it could even be called that, passed. But something had shifted. In Beijing, military analysts studied the global response. They noted the panic, the supply chain chaos, the financial losses. they noted something else too, the vulnerability. If a natural event could cause this much disruption, what could a coordinated action achieve? In Washington, the conversation grew more urgent. Proposals for emergency semiconductor stockpiles were floated. The idea of friendshoring production, shifting manufacturing to allies like Japan and South Korea gained traction, but all of it would take years, and time, as everyone now understood, was not a luxury. By mid-2025, a quiet understanding had settled over the major powers. Taiwan's semiconductor industry was the most valuable economic and strategic asset in the world. China wanted control of it, the United States needed to prevent that. Taiwan itself was caught between preservation and provocation, and the global economy, every device, every system, every network depended on a fragile equilibrium holding. No one called it a crisis. Not yet. But the pieces were moving. Military exercises intensified, diplomatic language hardened, defense budgets expanded, semiconductor companies accelerated their diversification plans, but the gap between ambition and reality remained vast. And in the middle of it all, in the clean rooms of Hsinchu, the machines kept running, because stopping wasn't an option. Not for Taiwan, not for the world. History offers few examples of a single industry holding this much geopolitical weight. Oil, perhaps, in the mid-20th century. But oil was abundant in multiple regions, control was contested, but never absolute. Semiconductors are different, the expertise is concentrated, the infrastructure is irreplaceable, and the stakes are existential. If conflict comes, it won't start with an invasion, it will start with a test. A blockade, a cyber incident, a manufacturing accident, something deniable, something just serious enough to send a message, and the world will be forced to choose, respond and risk escalation, or stay silent and accept a new reality. Because this isn't just about chips, it's about who controls the future. And many believe that the foundations of that future are being shaped right now, in the silent spaces between diplomacy and preparation. Whether this becomes a turning point depends on what happens next, and this is where uncertainty becomes dangerous.